Welcome, Mr. Secretary. What people don't know is that you and I go back so many years as friends and associates, and I am so happy for you and for the state of Florida that you are our Secretary of State.
Steve, it's an honor to be here. You've been a longtime friend, a mentor, and somebody I've looked up to, and I'm so delighted to be here for my very first time on your show.
It's great, and what a time to be Florida's Secretary of State. This is your second term as Secretary of State, and it's been an incredible year, and I want to take you back through it. I know you prepared hard for this election. It was going to be important. Florida was going to be important. We all knew it. But when you looked on television and you saw those long lines coming out of some election sites in Southeast Florida primarily, but other places, what were your thoughts?
Steve, actually, early on, before the campaigns started, I knew we had some specific challenges. Number one, because of the length of the ballot this year. There were 11 constitutional amendments on the ballot. That creates a different kind of challenge for supervisors of elections as our administrators. And so I tried to focus on large population areas and areas that we expected large turnouts. We never expected the kind of turnouts that we had this year, a record number. A total of 8.5 million people turned out. That's more people to turn out to vote in Florida than ever before. And people's voting habits are changing. 2.4 million people voted early before Election Day, and 2.4 million people voted absentee ballots. More people voted before Election Day than voted on Election Day. That's a record.
Say that again. I don't think many people really understand that. Say that again.
Well, you know, every election is different, and because Florida has been one of the most progressive states since 2000, Florida learned a lot of things about what people want in elections, and they learned that people want to vote early, and they want to vote in various locations, and they love the absentee ballot program, and so they're moving in that direction. And not only do we need to learn that from this election, but we need to plan for the future, for future elections.
And it caused a huge turnout.
It caused a huge turnout.
So
exactly.
There was a lot of interest in the election.
Which is, you know, we encourage that. We need larger turnouts. I think we had a 73% turnout this term, and we want more turnout. We want to encourage that. That's who we are as a nation and as a state.
Well, let's address the other side, though. The criticism due to passage of legislation prior to the 2012 election was that there was a shorter period for voting and so forth, and people on the Democratic side said that this was obviously an effort to suppress the vote and so forth. And there was anticipation that there would be a problem. Florida would be a key swing state, and it has been criticized, and the president in his recent State of the Union address had someone from Florida, an elderly person, who waited a long time in line. What do you think about those criticisms?
Well, you know, Steve, first of all, we had a very good election in Florida, and we had a fair election. These record turnouts were somewhat predictable, but in some ways they weren't because of the early voting and absentees. I like to remind people that the legislation that passed in 2011, there were 80 provisions in that legislation, and the United States Justice Department that reviews changes in Florida's election laws and other states approved all 80 of those provisions. Number two, while people think that there was less voting time, the fact is that the number of hours that were presented to voters was 96 hours. That's the same prior to the 2011 legislative session. It was the number of days actually that was reduced. So there were a lot of arguments pro and con, and I've got to tell you, adding 12 hours a day to the voting cycle increased accessibility for those people that were going to work in the morning and coming home from work. And people, a lot of supervisors, like that convenience. So the fact is, the long ballot was the number1 issue that contributed to the length of the lines and then projecting turnout in precincts.
All right, let's talk about, you know, you've looked at, I read the report, and it's comprehensive. And if you get really down into the weeds, it's probably a lot of stuff that only election supervisors will understand. But there's a lot of stuff in it that the public needs to know about. Mm-hmm. What are the biggest problems that you identified after traveling the state, meeting with election supervisors and others. Name the top 2 or 3 and we'll get down into the weeds with those.
Sure. Let me first mention this, that Governor Scott recognized that we had a problem, and it was unacceptable to him, it was unacceptable to the supervisors, and it's unacceptable to the legislature that we would have long lines and inconvenience the voting public. So he challenged me following the election. I'm the chief elections officer and work in partnership with supervisors who are independently elected to go out with a team of my people from the State Department Division of Elections and interview those supervisors that had problems. In addition, I talked to elections experts, poll workers, party people, people that had a vested interest in the administration of the election. I spoke to them, we returned, we developed some recommendations for the legislature. That's the report you're referring to. And there's some real basic fundamental things. The problems that we had are fixable. One, we need to expand the locations for early voting. We are limited by state law as to where you can vote.
Let's talk about that. Give me some details about that.
Sure. The law currently limits voting to supervisors' offices, county commissioners' offices, and libraries. And clearly we know that while there are a lot of libraries and a lot of government facilities, that's not adequate to meet the changing demand by the public. So our report recommended expanding that to use civic centers, any county building, fairgrounds, stadiums, and that should more than exceed the need for the demand of the public in the next election cycles and for the future. And those recommendations were thought out by supervisors and all, like I said, the interested parties that have a vested interest.
Especially when you consider that so many people are voting that way now.
Exactly. And important to emphasize is that supervisors need flexibility to go to the marketplace to find out where their populations live and to make sure that they're conveniently located for people. There are a lot of libraries that are annexes that don't have the proper parking. The rooms are not adequate for the voting machines. So I think we've really looked at this comprehensively. The other thing is that we've talked about increasing the number of days that somebody can vote from 8 to between 8 and 14 and give the supervisors the flexibility if they want to be open for the Sunday before the election to be open for Sunday. But flexibility for these supervisors is absolutely key to meeting the demand by the voting public.
So when you talk about moving from 8 days to 14 days and giving the supervisors flexibility, that could mean that in some counties it might be 8 days, and it could mean in others it might be 14. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly. And then when you combine the total number of days with the additional hours, we will go from what is currently 96 hours to the potential of 169 hours open for the voting public. And what Levy County needs is different than what Lee County needs, or St. Lucie County, or Miami, or Orange County. Every county has a population dynamics that's different, and the supervisor that's there is the best person to make a judgment about what the needs of their voting public is.
Before the show, you made a statement I want to make sure that we discuss right now, where you told me that it's not just the election supervisor in every county that has a responsibility, it's also the county government that has a responsibility to make sure that elections are handled efficiently and effectively. Can you expound on that?
Exactly. You know, laws are made here in Tallahassee. Appropriations for supervisors are made at the local level, and the local county commissions approve precincts. And so it's important that the legislature pass good laws, that local county commissions make sure that supervisors are provided enough resources financially to buy the equipment that they need. And when a supervisor needs to re-precinct or change the design or location of precincts, that they do that. An example is that in one county we talked to, they were not given permission to re-precinct as the supervisor wanted to, and some precincts had less than 1,000 people in it, and other precincts had over 5,000 to 8,000 people. And you're trying to manage turnout and manage technology. You've got to be able to manage the size and location of those precincts. So the county commissions have a responsibility, along with the legislature and the Department of State, to make sure, and supervisors, that the supervisors' needs are met.
I know this is a controversial question, but do you feel that the state should have a larger role in terms of minimum standards, in terms of administration of the elections process on the local level. I know that one of the things that probably happened as a result of the analysis that has taken place is you've seen variations in how different supervisors handle preparation for the election. Could there be a growing mood to have the Secretary of State take a more proactive role prior to the next election?
Well, Steve, that's a very timely question. In fact, in the Senate hearing last week before I appeared, there was some conversation about whether or not we should have that. I'm still reserved in my opinion about that. The supervisors under the Constitution of Florida are those elected people. It would require a constitutional amendment. But I can tell you, looking back, as I said at the beginning of the show, we had a very, very good election. 60 of the 67 counties performed very well. So I'm comfortable in knowing that our supervisors are doing a good job. Can the State Department help them some? Yes. Can the local county commissions do more to support them when they have needs? Yes. And so now I'm comfortable with what the Constitution says and the trust that I have in our local supervisors of elections.